pressure, one of the most important components of footy. And you'll hear this from every coach, whether it's like halftime break or in their press conferences. They always talk about, was there pressure there or not, as to how important it is.
Well, it's a fascinating topic because it fluctuates drastically. Forget
much.
week to week, but from quarter to quarter. And it's obviously you can control a lot of things, but it's something that you always look at as effort. And I think we always look at effort should determine pressure.
Yep.
If you're on and you're putting in the effort, then there's going to be pressure. It's hard for 22 players or 18 on the ground to be giving 100% effort and your pressure to be quite low.
And I think that's, again, goes to why coaches can sort of bring that easier up in a press conference post-match, because it is something you can expect. It doesn't matter how skillful you are or how tall you are or how little you are. Just please put pressure on. So it's that number you can see. It's just pure effort. It doesn't require skill.
It's a very just, I don't know, it's sort of just thrown out there, or the pressure needs to be on. But we thought we'd take a deep look at this, because what exactly is pressure? And you see the pressure gauge and the meter on Fox Footy, and you see the big number over 200, but what exactly does that number mean? So we wanted to ask you, Christian, what is pressure? How is it measured? Who are the best players? Who are the best teams that apply pressure, and obviously how important it is as well?
Yeah, so pressure that we're recording, so whenever you see a pressure rating number is sort of what we turn it into, is just looking at how much pressure each disposal of a game was performed under, and then adds in all the tackles that sort of stop a disposal from happening. So tackling a player and causing a ball up is a pressure act and will go into your pressure factor. And then every time someone kicks or handballs against you, how much pressure you were putting on them at that point of disposal. So bit of back and forth that we're always looking at is one big whole of the game we're not capturing is pressure on possession. So we know if you've got a hard ball get and a loose ball get, but we don't really know how much pressure you won the ball in compared to how much you disposed the ball in. And it is our next big thing to tick off the list is what players take it from a pressure situation and get it out of a pressure situation, et cetera, et cetera. At the moment, we just know, all right, who, when they're disposing of the ball, who is under the most pressure and who is applying the pressure behind them. So that's where the pressure rating comes from, just point of disposal. And we have two capture staff that are sort of separate to everyone else that are just capturing all this themselves, and they basically have
pressure.
Within pressure, they also doing what foot each person's kicking with. So if it's a left or right foot, what their intended target of the kick is, if they were kicking to a leading target, a stationary one-on-one, a pack situation, if they're having a shot for goal. So they do a little bit more, but basically when they're calling the pressure act at each handball or kick, they quote a number. So it's either a physical pressure act, which they call, again, bit of coder talk, they'll say 3. So a 3 pressure act is physical.
Which is being tackled. Someone's got a hand on you.
Someone's got a hand on you and affecting you. So one little finger on someone that's handballing the ball is not going to be physical pressure. It's going to be probably closing. You can feel the player that's receiving the physical pressure can feel it.
Yep.
That is the top line of pressure. That's worth 375 points, if you like. It's written with a decimal 3.75. So what that is when the player's under physical pressure, it's 3.75 times harder to hit the target than when you're under no pressure. And that's based on numbers that we collated from the past. So we first did pressure 2010. We did the whole of the 2010 season with just these values, and we were able to work out the values from there. Okay, if it's a physical act, we need to make it this much. If it's a closing act, it's worth this much, etc., etc. So it was all set up in 2010. And as I said, so if every single disposal the opposition has is under physical pressure, the pressure gauge that you'll see on Fox would say 375. But if you've ever paid notice to it, you never usually see that. It's usually set within a range of about 280, which is still very, very high, down to about 150, because all the disposals get evened out. So as I said, physical pressure, 375 points. If you're closing in on a player as he's disposing it, so that's from the front or side, and you're actually getting closer at the point of disposal, that's 225 pressure points. So a pressure rating of 225 means every single disposal is just under closing pressure and you're just getting hounded every time you have the ball.
But there's nothing in between those two.
There's nothing in between. So you could have 3 physical closing acts and 3 physical acts and 1 closing act, and all we do is just average out that number across. And that's your pressure rating for the game. So again, your pressure rating is basically just the average pressure each disposal is under for the opposition. So chasing is the next one. So as I said, 375 physical, 225 closing, 150 for chasing. So 1.5 times harder to hit the target when someone's chasing you from behind and catching.
How close would they have to be for it to be?
Again,
or how much further away they have to be from it to be?
2 or 3 steps. So chasing, it's
chasing.
either no pressure or chasing. So it's either like, there's a guy running behind him, but he can pick and choose when he disposes of the ball. Or there's a guy chasing him, so he knows I've got 2 more steps and now I have to kick it. So it's sort of a little bit of subjective. So it's got to be like the ball carrier knows that he's running out of time and needs to dispose of it.
This seems like, I'm sure it's all difficult, but this seems like an incredibly tough thing to do, looking at every single disposal for a game and having to decide this every single time.
Yep, and again, so we've got the 4 physical closing, chasing, corralling was the last one. So there's only 4 options to choose from. We try, and I've said it a million times on this podcast, try to keep it black and white because we want everything consistent. Football isn't black and white, so it's a lot of a video library and saying, okay, now that we're calling this closing, we're actually, reconsidering changing it to chasing or something. We haven't made many changes to this. We're all pretty consistent, but it does. You've got to watch probably 3 or 4 times someone else do the role before you can sort of slot in and do your own game. So we try to keep everyone on the same page. But I think the hardest part of it is they're doing everything based on off the ball. So you're so ball centric, and I'm a main caller, so I can call I can call the possessions, I can call the disposals and the hit outs, etc., etc. The pressure is just like, who was that flashed across the screen?
You just forget it.
Oh, their player ID is just enormous. They got to get player ID from just a little bit of tape or just a red boot appeared on the screen. So then they've got to go back and work out, all right, it was a red boot and there's 3 players wearing red boots. found him. There's Ainsworth. It's got to be like, it comes down to, we've got the GPS stuff that we can really, if we really want to, we can go back to that and work out who's, but I think that's the hardest part of the job is the camera doesn't film the pressure player. It films the ball carrier and you've just got to work out the pressure player behind him. So, as I said, so the 4th level of pressure is corralling. So that's just sort of standing there in front of someone. You're not moving towards them as such, but you're sort of taking the space away. That's 120 pressure points. If you're under no pressure, you still get 100 points on your pressure rating. And for every set kick, you still get 75. So there would never be a pressure rating of 0. If someone takes the ball, if someone gets a free kick in the ruck, chips it down the field, takes a mark, 3 marks in a row and kicks a goal, goes back to the centre, the opposition will have a pressure rating of 0.75.
Yep.
Basically just for being out there. Because, again, this got explained to me by a much smarter person. It made sense when they explained it to me, but there is no sort of 0, like they've started.
There's just no
one is the starting value of no pressure.
Yeah.
It's actually easier to hit the target from a set kick than when you're
because
under.
it's all relative based on, that makes sense.
Pressure means you're in general play, but there's no one around you, whereas a set kick is everyone has to stop and no one's allowed to sort of come near you. So that's the the 5 acts that we're sort of doing, and from that we get to a number of a total average. So
can I just jump in there, because this you may have just answered a question I have. I always see pressure acts. So say Tom Liberatore had 32 pressure acts.
Yep.
Now I think most people, when they think pressure, they think, he's had 8 tackles. Well, where have the other 24 pressure acts come from?
Yep.
So they're all corralling, chasing. That's a pressure act.
Yep, corralling, chasing, closing, and physical pressure are all pressure acts.
So it doesn't have. It's obviously not just tackles. It's anything that can contribute to this.
Yeah, every time they've been called by our pressure callers of chasing a kicker or corralling a kicker, that is a pressure act. So pressure acts is a nice number of how many times you're there putting pressure on, but then we also have your pressure points, which again is sort of a funny name.
But you could have 3 or 4 pressure acts in a sequence of play if it's all in tight.
And if it's all corralling, you end up with 120 pressure points, which is very light. 200 is a good number to aim for. So 3 corralling acts where you're in the face of 3 handballs, but they're just handballing over your head.
Anything.
You get 120. You get 3 pressure acts, that's great. You get 120 pressure points, which isn't as great.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do the same thing, but you grab their arm each time they handball it, you might end up with 3 pressure acts and 375 pressure points.
How late can the contact be for it to be deemed physical pressure? Like
On
if
disposal,
if someone's handballing the footy and you just get there late and push him in the chest,
it'll be closing. Okay. So the physical pressure has to have. The balance doesn't come into it, but it's a good way to say it. It probably made him off balance, or at least you were grabbing his jumper. But there is some times where you look at it and go, and it's frame by frame now. It's like that is 2 frames too late. It is closing. Like you weren't actually touching him when you kicked it. So
the other thing is there won't be any difference, or a player won't get any any greater benefit or rating if they tackle someone and it's a stop and it's a ball up as opposed to tackling and it's a holding the ball free? Is that does that pressure treated differently?
No, the pressure isn't. It's just that because you'll end up with the free kick, you'll get points for the free kick in your disposal. So you'll end up with more points because of the resulting. But the actual tackle, what you've done is the same. It's up to the umpire to call. If the umpire calls ball up,
that's true. Yeah,
you don't. You shouldn't lose points because it's it's an umpire call.
Who are the best teams currently?
Yeah, so we look at pressure, and again, so the best teams. There's two ways to look at a best team in pressure. So who's applying the most pressure is always a good way to sort of look at it. So this year, who's applying the most pressure on their opposition? Carlton's number one. A lot of contests in their games and very much, coming around to that stoppage-based game the last 4 weeks. Geelong number 2, Gold Coast 3, Collingwood 4, and Port are 5th. So that's just applying pressure. If you look at, I just looked at last season, it was Sydney, Adelaide, GWS, Bulldogs, Fremantle.
Just totally different.
None of the top 5 are the same across both years, just for total pressure.
Is it something that fluctuates a lot because they're all the actual amounts are quite close? I don't know.
Sydney's always been up there, so it's surprised. Sydney would have been up there for 3 years in a row, aren't up in the top 5 this year. Adelaide come and go. Giants have been a big pressure team. Surprised to not see them in the top 5. So it can be, but Geelong won the premiership and they rated 14th for pressure. This year they're the top team going well. They're the 3rd rated team for pressure. So for them, I reckon their switch has come. They're winning less contested ball, and they know we no longer. Before the weekend they didn't have Cam Guthrie playing. Dangerfield's probably not the same. Joel Selwood's not there. They realise we don't have the raw contested ball winners, so we probably have to put a little bit more emphasis on the pressure of if they do beat us to the ball, we need to be ready to tackle them and corral them. So they're the second best pressure after, as I said, won the premiership being the 14th and neglecting pressure almost. So a little bit of a change for them. But if you look at best post-clearance pressure, so it's very easy. If the game's just continually at stoppages, it's very easy to put pressure on at a stoppage. You take one step and put your arm out and you're closing someone or physically because everyone's in closer. It's the post-clearance pressure. It's about the teams winning the ball in open space and you being able to close down on them quickly.
And that's what you would view as more important.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it leads to more, a better win rate and things like that. So Carlton's the best post-clearance pressure team. Collingwood jump up to 2nd.
Does that surprise you about Carlton?
A little bit, yeah, because I see post-clearance pressure. I think you need a little bit of speed.
That's exactly
to get to it, and I don't see that when I watch Carlton. But the structure, again, I think they balance themselves out that they don't let the game open up. That was a big thing when they played Brisbane in round 0. The more the game opened up and the more Brisbane were able to use the wings, Carlton just couldn't keep up with them.
Yeah.
But if it goes from contest to contest to contest, Carlton's always there, ready for the next contest. If they don't win the ball, they're ready to tackle you and get it to the next contest. It's on the spread. I think you can get Carlton with leg speed. So post-clearance, Carlton number 1, Collingwood 2, which is a big part of their game that they've always had. Port 3, Sydney 4th, and Geelong 5th. So I think the best 5 post-clearance teams sort of stack up with a ladder better than the top 5 just raw clearance teams. I mean, Gold Coast drop out and Sydney come in. But then you can also look at pressure differential. So I've always stated that if you put high pressure on your opposition, you're probably going to receive high pressure as well because you're
it's all played in
everyone's playing closer together and things like that. So Collingwood won a premiership based on their pressure differential. Surprising this year, I thought I'd run it and I'd get a good scope for a team. Port are plus 14 points for pressure. So talking about the pressure factor, if they're at 200, which would be very good, but if they're at 190 for every week, they're 14 more. So their opposition's usually at 176 each week.
And that's the
biggest. Sydney plus 9, Bulldogs plus 9, GWS plus 7, Carlton plus 3. So Port, fair way ahead. That's what Collingwood, again, that was one of the most impressive things for me of Collingwood the last 2 years was their ability. They avoided pressure, but then they were able to put on pressure immensely as well. So they always had the best differential.
Yet another important metric or area where the Bulldogs rate quite highly in.
Yeah,
we've talking about it 3 weeks in a row, I reckon, about just why are they not as good as they should be. But it is interesting that a lot of those teams are, because you say pressure, and as we started this segment, we were talking about it's effort-based, yet the good teams are the ones that rate high in it. Yep. It's not like you have poor teams that just, we put effort on, but we're just not really good at anything else.
Yeah, just quickly as well, when it comes to players applying pressure, who are the best players in the competition, and does that correlate with the teams that they play for that you've just reeled off?
Yeah, so I mean, some of Gold Coast and Sydney are high. So the best pressure acts players, so Matty Rowell, 28.7 pressure acts per game. Row bottom 27.4 and Viney 27.4 pressure acts per game. But then you go to pressure points. So as I said, you end up with 3.75 for a physical pressure act and so on and so on. Row bottom has 72.7 pressure points per game. So he overtakes Rao. So his pressure is just a bit more of the closing and physical pressure than Matt Rao is. So Rao drops to second. Third is Will Graham. Up there with Matt Rao, Parf at fourth and Libba fifth. But yeah, look at Graham and Rao, sort of the academy sort of inclusion for Hardwick. It's almost like, we'll just go play next to Rao. You know, we're sort of generating another Rao. I don't think he wins the ball as well as him, but his tackling's just been through the roof. And as I said, yeah, he appears second to Rao in a few numbers.
Row bottom's an interesting one. I think Willem Drew, very similar type player, I think. Willem Drew is starting to get a little bit more love now, I think particularly after winning the medal a few days ago. But they feel very similar in terms of their role for their club and the importance. Yet everyone's going to continue to overlook them.
Yeah, I think Drew is a lot more. He's given license to win the ball at a few clearances. I think Rowbottom's just there to tackle almost. It feels like so he's always sort of hanging on to a guy at the stoppage, and his main job is to not let them get easy ball out of the stoppage. So, as I said, Rowbottom, Rao, Graham, Parfittly, but they're all midfielders. They're all around the ball more. Yep. So we can also look at forward 50 pressure points and D50 pressure points. So I thought I'd give some love to the small forwards and back. So Lockie Fogarty, when he was playing for Carlton, 21.1 forward 50 pressure points per game was number one. Paul Curtis, second for North, which is quite, impressive considering how little North have the ball down there, but he is chasing quite hard.
Paul Curtis is.
Sam Switkowski, who I don't know, I think me and you have discussed him. He is always in the top 5 for this stat, and it's where Champion Data sees Switkowski's value in the pressure and what he can do at ground level in the forward 50.
There was a bit of uproar when he was rated elite by you guys.
And I think a lot to do with was his ground ball winning and his tackling forward of centre was just above everyone else. Charlie Cameron fourth and Darcy Byrne-Jones is fifth, who sort of switched down there the last 18 months. It's been a really good pressure forward for Port Adelaide. In the back 50, got Harry Sheasel up there again, so he's actually 17.3 pressure points in the defensive 50. Next most is Noah Answorth at Brisbane at 14.3, so it's a fair gap. But again, I feel like Sheasel's a midfield playing in the wrong zone, and this number almost says the same thing as well. He's got a lot more opportunity to put pressure on. The ball's down there a lot, but his numbers are so much similar to a midfielder.
But his numbers are skewed because that's the start. We've spoken about this with Dustin Martin. The starting position and then the drifting.
Yeah, but he doesn't drift. That's the problem with him. He doesn't drift. He just plays defence, but they run the ball through him.
So much.
The ball's down there so much. So he's getting a look at it like a midfielder. Just quickly wanted to go back to I was talking about post clearance and pre clearance. So it's much easier to put a pre-clearance pressure on. So if you're looking at your pressure number, sometimes it can be a bit misleading just to look at your pressure rating. You might want to look at just your post-clearance. So looking at win rates, so 2010 was the first year we did pressure. We did it at the end of the season off video, so coaches didn't get it live. And 2011 was the first time it went live in a coach's box, and they could actually make decisions based on that. So when we did it off video, the win percentage for pre-clearance pressure, you win more pressure pre-clearance, and you win 52% of the time, 66% for post-clearance pressure. And it's almost, as I said, as it's got live into the coach's box, it's almost gone up nearly every single year, fluctuated, but we're up to this year, 55% of the time you win pre-clearance, you win the game, 74% post-clearance, you win the game.
Wow.
So that's applying more pressure.
And you just expect that to keep trending upward?
I would think so. So again, the second part of it is, yes, pressure's a great number, but really take away the post-clearance pressure number is the effort and the structure that the coaches are probably talking about post-match.
So post-clearance pressure is the one that you really need to try and be strong at.
Yeah,
that's the one that you win games of footy.
Most important place to put pressure
74%.
on.
74%. It's higher than I thought it would be, but there you go, Jake. Pressure.
Very good. I remember we spoke about pressure a while ago, but it's a good...
always good to revisit and remind yourself how it all works.
Absolutely, and you said it off the top about the pressure gauge you see on Fox, and I think so. The number they put on there, so 200. That's just
the average
points.
multiplied by 100 from the because you do 3 point.
It was quoted as 3.75, but we found coaches would rather than saying we're at 1.81 pressure factor, we're at 181 pressure factor.
Sounds better than 1.8.
So
your pressure was 1.8. Just doesn't sound very
good.
good.
So and again, there was this loose number of 200 was that that
That's what
number
you
you
wanna
wanted
be
to
above.
reach. It
Yeah.
was surprisingly, I do have the number here.
Yeah.
So you reached 200 and it's 65% win rate. So it's probably gone down a little bit. But that was the first start of it. Coaches
that's
didn't
just
coaches
general
didn't come in
pressure,
and
yeah.
watch. So I've just explained to you how a capturer would look at it and go, that's physical, that's closing. The coaches didn't know any of that. They just knew this magic number was coming in, and the closer it was to 200, the better they felt about the team. So it was very simple. It was just like, I just want this number to be closer to 200. Give me a year or two of monitoring just this number, and then I'll get my head around how do we actually action
Right.
out on the field to get that number to closer to 200. So, I think that number's gone down a little bit, but the pressure rating they show on Fox, they'll usually only show it when there is a big differential or a big jump in numbers. You're not going to see 90% of the game pressure's usually within 1 or 2 points across the teams playing.